She embarrassed this entire community. Rated as a gold.
You laid hands on a child.
She yanked my daughter by the hair over a dress code, right as my brother stepped out of his patrol car. I still remember the sound, the quick gasp, the crowd freezing, the clipboard clattering against the pavement. For 3 seconds, no one moved. Then I did. If you've ever seen someone abuse power in plain sight and felt that fire rise in your chest, stay right here. This story isn't about fear. It's about what happens when fear finally loses its audience. Cynthia Granger, the board chair of Meadowbrook Estates, stood in the middle of the community park like she owned the sunlight. Her crimson blazer caught the heat, her heels dug into the grass, and her voice carried that condescending rhythm HOA presidents practice in mirrors. "Dress violations reflect on everyone, Mr. Barrett," she barked. "Your child represents this neighborhood." Lily tried to pull away, but the enforcer in crimson tightened her grip, the polished nails glinting like tiny blades. The clipboard queen raised her paperwork like a shield. "This isn't personal," she said, though her eyes made it personal. "It is now," I told her. Behind me, the crowd shifted, neighbors pretending not to see. And then a car door slammed. My brother, Dean Rivera, still in his SWAT fatigues, stepped into view. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His badge caught the sun first, then his eyes. Calm. Assessing. Waiting. The tyrant in heels faltered for half a heartbeat. She released Lily's hair, but kept her tone sharp. "You need to learn compliance, not confrontation." I stepped between them, my voice low enough to sting. "Compliance is when a community agrees to fairness. What you're doing is theater." The officer of rules narrowed her gaze. "You're out of line, Mr. Barrett. Board policy allows disciplinary intervention." "Touch her again," I cut in, "and policy won't save you." She blinked, realizing too late the man in front of her wasn't just another homeowner. I'd built the security network she bragged about in her monthly newsletter, the one with street corner cameras and HOA-monitored feeds. Every lens here fed through my software. Every angle watched her now. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe right now, I said quietly, turning to the onlookers. "Pay attention, this is how they fall. One act of exposure at a time." Dean moved closer, his presence enough to make silence feel heavier than sirens. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, voice even. Cynthia tried to smile, but it cracked halfway. "Just enforcing decorum, officer. Nothing unusual?" Her words landed like lies in slow motion. I caught Lily's trembling hand, the faint red mark behind her ear. That was all the evidence I needed. My daughter's tears weren't loud. They were steady, quiet, disciplined, like she'd inherited strength instead of permission to cry. I turned back to the clipboard. Queen. Decorum died the moment you laid a hand on her. Something in her expression shifted then, anger mixed with the sudden fear of being watched by someone she couldn't control. The crowd's murmurs began, soft but growing. Every HOA tyrant lives on silence. Break that, and their kingdom trembles. Dean gave me a look that said, "Hold the line." His body stayed calm, but his jaw flexed. The training that kept him composed on raids was now restraining him here. Cynthia Granger adjusted her blazer, reclaiming her mask. "You'll receive a formal citation for harassment, Mr. Barrett. Expect notice within 24 hours. I smiled, cold. "Perfect. I prefer everything in writing. Easier to prove later." Her eyes flashed confusion. She didn't know what I already had. Camera footage, timestamps, witness logs. The system she paid for was about to undo her entire empire. As she turned away, I whispered to Dean, "She thinks she's still untouchable." He replied under his breath, "Let's make her famous for the opposite." And that's where it began. Not a shouting match, not revenge. Just a moment of truth, recorded by the very cameras she'd trusted to control us. Where are you watching from? Because what happens next will make you question every rule you've ever obeyed. The next morning, the HOA email hit my inbox at 6:02 a.m. Sharp. Subject line, "Immediate notice of non-compliance." I didn't have to open it to know who wrote it. The language had Cynthia Granger's fingerprints all over it. Sharp, formal, venom, disguised as professionalism. The board chair claimed I had verbally assaulted an HOA representative and created a hostile environment at a public facility. She even attached photos from the park, carefully cropped, selective, and without sound. My daughter's tears weren't visible. My brother's badge wasn't in frame, just my posture, mid-defensive, frozen in her narrative. I stared at the email for a long time before forwarding it to Dean. His reply came 5 minutes later. She's trying to control the optics. Don't respond yet. Optics. That's what Cynthia lived for. The illusion of order, even when the ground under her was rotten. The enforcer in crimson didn't just want obedience. She needed worship. And when she didn't get it, she built her own version of the truth. By mid-morning, I could feel the neighborhood shifting. Lawnmowers hummed louder than usual, but no one made eye contact. Parents walked their kids faster past my driveway. Fear travels faster than gossip here, and Cynthia had always been its courier. Lily sat on the porch steps, knees pulled to her chest, her hair tied back this time. "They're saying we attacked her," she whispered. "People at school saw the emails." The clipboard queen had weaponized reputation before, fines, emails, newsletters. But this was personal. She wanted isolation. Discredit the father before the truth can take root. I knelt beside my daughter. "Let them talk," I said. "We have proof." Proof. That word pulsed in my head like a warning. Because proof wasn't just a weapon. It was responsibility. Around noon, Dean stopped by. Still in uniform, he leaned against his patrol SUV at the curb, sunglasses hiding the frustration in his eyes. "County regulations are clear," he said quietly. "If she touched Lily, that's assault. But unless Lily's statement is filed, it's just a neighborhood dispute." "She's 15, Dean. She doesn't need this public circus." "She already has one," he said, "and it's being run by the tyrant in heels." I followed his gaze toward the community gate, where Cynthia stood beside 2 board members, clipboard in hand, directing landscapers like she was orchestrating a parade. Her crimson jacket burned against the pale concrete, authority dressed like temptation. "She's taunting you," Dean said, "testing your reaction." "She'll get silence instead," I replied. "That's what rattles her most." That evening, a printed letter appeared taped to my front door. HOA letterhead. No signature, but I didn't need one. The officer of rules always left her mark. It read, "Further incidents will result in suspension of community privileges, including access to shared facilities and events. We expect full cooperation moving forward." I almost laughed. She'd just threatened to ban my daughter from the same park where she'd been attacked. Power isn't real until someone believes in it, and Cynthia built her empire on that belief. I took the letter down, folded it neatly, and placed it beside my keyboard. My screen showed the security feed from the park cameras. Multiple angles, high resolution, audio intact. There it was. Every frame, every second, every motion she'd tried to erase with emails and gossip. The enforcer in crimson was about to learn what transparency really looked like. At midnight, I began compiling clips, syncing timestamps, and extracting stills. The footage didn't just show the assault, it captured the crowd's silence, the fear, the false authority standing over my child. The more I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't about address. It was about dominance, image, and one woman's addiction to control. A notification popped up. Anonymous number. "Stop digging. You're making a mistake." No name, no signature, just threat wrapped in cowardice. I smiled. "You have no idea," I muttered. The clipboard queen had started a war built on perception. I was about to turn her own cameras into witnesses. Tomorrow, I'd start sending copies, quietly, carefully, to a few residents I trusted. Maybe a retired teacher, maybe that local reporter who'd once written about HOA overreach. Cynthia Granger had her narrative ready, but so did I. And mine had sound, proof, and truth. Unedited. By morning, I could tell something had changed. The silence wasn't ordinary. It was calculated. The hum of sprinklers, the clink of garden tools, the forced smiles of neighbors pretending not to stare. It was all part of her performance. Cynthia Granger had always known how to choreograph fear. At exactly 9, the board chair called an urgent compliance review. The email went to every resident except me. She'd held meetings before, but this one was different. She wanted spectacle. Control was only satisfying when people watched her wield it. From my window, I saw cars filling the clubhouse lot. Lily watched too, chewing her lip. a bruise still faint behind her ear. "Are you going?" she asked. "Not today," I said, "but someone is." Dean had already agreed. He'd attend as a silent observer, out of uniform, but not out of authority. His presence alone would unsettle the enforcer in crimson. When he arrived, he parked near the gate, engine idling. "You sure you want me inside?" he asked. "She feeds off fear," I said. "Just stand where she can see you." Inside the clubhouse, Cynthia paced before the crowd. The clipboard queen's tone was sugar-coated poison. "It's come to my attention," she began, "that certain residents have chosen to misrepresent this community's standards. One in particular has used personal tragedy as a weapon." Murmurs filled the room. Dean leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, his calm presence slicing through her theatrics. "The Barrett family," she continued, her crimson blazer catching the light, "has spread manipulated footage of a routine enforcement interaction. This ends now. I'll be submitting formal complaints to county enforcement." A hand rose near the middle row, Marcia Coleman, the retired teacher everyone trusted. "Routine enforcement?" she said. "You grabbed that child." The tyrant in heels didn't flinch. "You weren't there, Marcia." "But I was," another voice added from the corner. "Dean's." The room turned. He stepped forward slowly, eyes level. "You might want to think carefully about calling that footage manipulated," he said, "because the timestamp matches my patrol cam." For the first time, the officer of rules blinked, slow, uncertain. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. "You're out of line, sir. This is a community matter." "An assault is never a community matter," he said evenly. Gasps rippled across the room. Cynthia's smile trembled. She set her clipboard down with deliberate precision, her weapon of order turned shield once again. "You're interfering in HOA business." "No," Dean said. "I'm reminding you that HOA business ends where the law begins." The enforcer in crimson glanced toward her board allies, searching for a lifeline. None met her eyes. One quietly shifted his chair away, the first crack in her wall of obedience. Meanwhile, at home, I watched the same meeting unfold through the camera feed. My network, her downfall. Every word recorded, every expression captured. Lily sat beside me, knees pulled close, watching the woman who had humiliated her now squirm under truth's lens. "Is Uncle Dean going to arrest her?" Lily whispered. "Not yet," I said. "Some people destroy themselves faster than justice can catch up." Back in the clubhouse, Cynthia tried to reclaim authority. "If anyone continues to circulate false material, the board will pursue defamation suits." Dean smirked slightly. "Then I'll look forward to cross-examining you when the footage plays in court." Her breath caught. Power had shifted without a single raised voice. That evening, after the meeting dissolved in whispers, Dean stopped by my house. His composure cracked for the first time all week. "You should have seen her face," he said quietly. "You hit her where she lives, in image." I nodded, sliding a flash drive across the table. "This is the complete footage. It's clean, verified, and ready for the reporter." Dean hesitated. "Michael, once it's public, there's no going back." "She made it public the moment she grabbed my daughter," I said. Outside, the sun dipped behind the manicured roofs of Meadowbrook Estates, casting long, narrow shadows, like lines drawn between truth and power. And somewhere across that perfect street, Cynthia Granger, the clipboard queen of control, stood staring out her window, realizing the same cameras she'd installed to watch others were now watching her. By sunrise, the neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. The HOA newsletter, once her favorite megaphone, stayed silent that morning. That alone meant Cynthia Granger was regrouping. The woman never stayed quiet unless she was planning a louder attack. At 8 sharp, a courier dropped off an envelope on my doorstep, embossed with the HOA seal. Inside was a notice of conduct review. The board chair wanted a formal meeting at week's end to evaluate the Barrett family's continued pattern of disruption. I almost laughed. She wasn't addressing the assault. She was reframing it as our rebellion. Lily peeked over my shoulder. "She's still coming after us?" "People like her don't stop," I said, folding the letter. "They just get creative." Dean called 5 minutes later. "She's filing reports with the precinct, claims you threatened her at the park. She's reaching for law to hide behind it." "She can reach all she wants," I replied. "We'll see how she handles when law reaches back." By mid-morning, I watched the enforcer in crimson from my porch camera feed. She was already outside, orchestrating a landscaping crew like she was running a military drill. Her movements were precise, her smile mechanical. I noticed something new, though. 2 board members trailing behind, whispering. One of them, Greg Simons, looked uneasy. I decided to approach. The moment I crossed the street, Cynthia turned toward me, that same glossy grin, ready for war. "Mr. Barrett," she greeted, tone sweet but sharp. "If this is about your daughter, I suggest using proper communication channels." I stopped a few feet away, calm. "You mean the ones where you edit replies?" The clipboard queen's expression hardened. "You seem intent on creating chaos in a peaceful community. Maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for your family." There it was, the subtle threat beneath her civility. "You'd love that, wouldn't you?" I said. "Erase us like you erase accountability." Her smile froze, and I saw the first real crack. The tyrant in heels stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Don't test me, Michael. I built this place's reputation. I decide who belongs here." I met her gaze, steady. "No, you just convinced everyone to believe you did." Her face twitched. She hated when power met calm. I turned, walked back toward my house, and saw Greg, the uneasy board member, glance away quickly. His body language screamed conflict. He knew something. That night, I got my confirmation. A single text buzzed my phone from an unknown number. "You didn't hear this from me, but check the HOA cameras near Lot 14. You'll want the footage from last Thursday." It had to be Greg. Accessing the system wasn't difficult. It was mine before she took credit for implementing it. I logged in through a maintenance channel she didn't even know existed. What I found made my pulse spike. The footage showed Cynthia meeting with 2 contractors at sunset. They weren't adjusting sprinklers, they were removing one of the park cameras, the same one that captured the assault from the clearest angle. She'd tried to erase it from the network. The officer of rules had gone rogue against her own rules. I exported the backup and copied the metadata. That camera's feed had already auto-synced to a county cloud. She couldn't destroy it, only delay its discovery. At midnight, I called Dean. "She tampered with evidence," I said. He exhaled sharply. "That's obstruction, Mike. She's digging her own hole. She just doesn't know how deep it is yet." He was silent for a beat. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Not yet. Let her keep digging. When she's knee-deep, I'll start recording." Outside, the neighborhood slept under artificial peace. Porch lights glowed in neat regulated rows, her idea of order. But order without conscience was just fear in uniform. Across the street, the enforcer in crimson stood under her porch light, phone to her ear, whispering. She looked smaller from here, more desperate, her shoulders tense against the glow. Even tyrants get nervous when the walls start whispering back. For the first time, I realized Cynthia wasn't untouchable. She was predictable, and predictability was the first sign of a crumbling empire. The next day began with rain, thin, misty, and constant, the kind that turns silence into pressure. My phone buzzed before sunrise. A message from Cynthia Granger, written like a corporate threat disguised as courtesy. "Mr. Barrett, you are hereby reminded that unauthorized access to HOA property constitutes a violation of Civil Code 412.5. Please confirm removal of any personal surveillance from community infrastructure immediately." The board chair had figured out I'd been inside her system. Not how, not when, but enough to rattle her. I didn't respond. The less she knew about what I had, the better. She'd already broken her own rules. I just needed her to prove it again. By noon, the enforcer in crimson was back to her routine. Clipboards, commands, and the illusion of control. I watched from my office window, tracking her movements through the live feeds. Her crimson blazer flashed through the rain like a warning flare. Every time she stopped to lecture a landscaper or scold a dog walker, her mask slipped a little more. She didn't know that I'd already shared the footage with Dean. The SWAT officer didn't need to say it aloud. He understood leverage. "She's panicking," he said over the phone that afternoon. "Her lawyer's already calling precinct connections. That's a sign she's prepping for a storm." "She should," I replied. "I'm done waiting for one." That evening, a knock echoed through the house. When I opened the door, Marcia Coleman stood there clutching an umbrella and a folder of printed pages. The retired teacher looked nervous. I wasn't sure if I should bring this, she said softly, but after what she did to your girl, I couldn't sleep. Inside the folder were old HOA newsletters, everyone authored by the clipboard queen herself. They weren't just updates, they were public humiliation, written with precision. Neighbors fined, families named, examples of non-compliance paraded like lessons. The worst part? Some of the stories matched private details residents had never shared. She used confidential records to shame people, Marcia said, and she made me edit them. The tyrant in heels had turned communication into blackmail. I scanned the pages, recognizing a pattern, phrases lifted from private complaint forms, data sourced from member accounts. Cynthia hadn't just been enforcing policy. She'd been weaponizing private information. This could be enough for a privacy violation, I murmured. Marcia nodded. There's more. She's planning to host a board-wide emergency session tomorrow. Says she'll restore authority before gossip destroys credibility. Her words, not mine. Of course she was. The officer of rules always believed one meeting could erase accountability. When Marcia left, I called Dean again. She's moving fast, I said. Tomorrow she'll try to rewrite everything. Then we move faster, he said. The reporter you mentioned, Rhodes, right? Let me reach out through a friend, at Channel 8. If she sees that footage, this becomes a public issue, not just a neighborhood feud. The plan clicked instantly. Public exposure. That was how you dismantle someone who lived for image. That night, I compiled everything. The unedited park footage, the removed camera files, Marcia's newsletters, timestamps, and copies of every threatening email. Each file told the same story. Control, vanity, and abuse hidden behind neighborhood decorum. As I finished, an alert pinged on my phone. HOA surveillance feed. New login detected. Someone was in the system. I accessed the log. C. Granger. The enforcer in crimson was trying to overwrite the remaining park footage, but she didn't realize I'd mirrored the system weeks ago. Each keystroke she made was recorded. Every deletion attempt, every unauthorized entry. I hit record on my external screen capture. Cynthia Granger's own security cameras were now documenting her tampering with evidence. Outside, thunder cracked, rain hammered the pavement, pooling beneath the community sign that bore her name. The illusion of order she'd built was dissolving, one drop at a time. For the first time, I felt no anger, only precision. Tomorrow, when the clipboard queen gathered her board, she'd think she was restoring control. Instead, she'd be walking straight into her own exposure, broadcasted, time-stamped, undeniable. The tyrant in heels wanted a meeting. She was about to get a reckoning. The morning of the emergency session came drenched in heat and tension. The HOA hall, usually echoing with polite chatter, now buzzed like a courtroom about to explode. Neighbors filed in, clutching coffee cups and whispers. At the front stood Cynthia Granger, the board chair, radiant in her signature crimson jacket, as if defiance were a fashion choice. She adjusted the microphone, smile poised, voice dripping with performative grace. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began. It's time we address the misinformation circulating about our community's leadership. False narratives harm property values and our shared integrity. There it was again, her favorite weapon. Guilt disguised as unity. The enforcer in crimson thrived on collective silence. I entered through the side door, unnoticed at first. Dean followed behind, out of uniform, but unmistakably authoritative. The crowd quieted when they saw us. Even the clipboard queen's expression faltered. Mr. Barrett, she said, feigning composure, you weren't invited to this session. I smiled faintly. I didn't come for your invitation. I came for the truth. The tyrant in heels let out a rehearsed sigh. You're continuing to escalate tension. For everyone's sake, please take your seat. But I didn't move. I set a small USB drive on the table between us. This, I said, contains everything you've tried to erase. Her gaze flickered to the drive like it was a ticking bomb. Unauthorized surveillance is illegal, she replied, voice tightening. I'll have to report this. Already done, I interrupted. County Legal received it this morning, along with your access logs. You've been editing footage, deleting files, and logging in under resident accounts. Gasps rippled through the room. One of the board members, the younger one, Greg, looked down, guilt painting his face. The officer of rules swallowed hard, but recovered fast. Baseless claims, she said. You're exploiting tragedy to smear leadership. This meeting will not become your personal vendetta. Dean stepped forward then, his tone measured. As a law enforcement officer, I can confirm that evidence tampering carries real consequences, Ms. Granger. You should choose your next words carefully. The board chair's mask cracked for just a heartbeat. This is intimidation, she snapped. No, I said quietly. This is accountability. From the back of the room, Marcia Coleman stood. I saw the footage, she said. All of it. You touched that child, Cynthia. You hurt her. Then you tried to hide it. The enforcer in Crimson's voice shook. You're misinterpreting what you saw. Marcia's voice rose. No one misinterprets a scream. The room erupted, neighbors talking over one another, disbelief blending with relief. It was as if months of quiet oppression had suddenly found its voice. Cynthia slammed her clipboard down, the sharp crack echoing like a gavel. Enough, she barked. I have given this community structure, order, reputation. You ungrateful people would rather drown in chaos. I leaned forward. Structure built on fear isn't order, it's captivity. She pointed a trembling hand at me. You think you've won because you have a camera? You don't understand what power means. Dean's voice cut through the air. No, you don't understand what accountability means. At that moment, my phone buzzed. Tanya Rhodes, the local reporter, had just texted. Broadcast scheduled for 6 p.m. Everything verified. I looked at Cynthia and said, tonight, the county and the world will see exactly what you call structure. Her composure finally shattered. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll ruin your own name before you ruin mine. Already did, I said, holding her gaze. You just didn't realize your reputation's been recording itself for months. The clipboard queen froze, realization dawning. The cameras she'd ordered for community transparency were now her undoing. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a slow, deliberate drumbeat. The audience watched as she gathered her papers with trembling hands, the crimson of her jacket suddenly looking less like power and more like warning. Dean turned to me as we stepped out. Think she'll show up for the broadcast? I glanced back through the glass door, watching the once fearsome tyrant in heels crumble under whispers and side glances. She won't have to, I said. Her reputation will. The rain started again, steady, cleansing, unstoppable. By nightfall, the truth would belong to everyone. By the time the sun bled out behind the rooftops, Cynthia Granger's empire had begun to crumble. But she didn't know how deep the cracks went. I spent that entire night refining every file, every timestamp, making sure nothing she touched could vanish again. At dawn, I found myself in the one place she thought I'd avoid, the HOA office. The door was ajar, fluorescent light buzzing above stacks of binders. Behind them, the board chair herself sat perfectly still, staring at her reflection in the dark window. For the first time, she looked smaller than the title she'd built. She noticed me before I spoke. Trespassing again, Sheriff? Her voice carried exhaustion disguised as authority. Office opens at 9, I said calmly. You're early. The enforcer in crimson turned, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. You've poisoned this neighborhood with paranoia. I hope you're proud. I'm not proud, I said, but I'm done being quiet. On the corner desk sat an open laptop, live HOA feed playing. I noticed one new folder, Incident Review, Barrett Case. She'd been cataloging me. Every image of my family's house, every letter, every supposed infraction, compiled like evidence for a private trial. That's not oversight, I said, stepping closer. That's obsession. The clipboard queen smiled thinly. Documentation, something you might appreciate if you'd ever done your paperwork correctly. I hit record on my phone. You're documenting a family whose child you assaulted. Her hand froze mid-gesture. I restrained her, she snapped. Dress code violations invite discipline. Discipline? My voice sharpened. She's 9. The tyrant in heels rose from her chair, voice trembling with restrained fury. Your daughter's behavior undermined community order. You parade around like law makes you special. But here, I decide what order means. And that, I said quietly, is exactly what the footage shows. Her jaw locked. The officer of rules wasn't used to anyone quoting her own words back with proof attached. I could see the fear creeping in, not of me, but of the moment she'd finally lost control of her story. That's when the door opened. Laura Chen stood there, hesitating. The conflicted witness looked caught between two fires. "Cynthia," she said softly, "we need to talk." The board chair straightened. "Later, this conversation is private." Laura stepped forward anyway, badge glinting. "Not anymore." Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "I reviewed the footage. I saw you order the contractors to disable park surveillance after the assault. I saw you file false reports. I can't be part of it anymore." Cynthia blinked, disbelief flickering like static. "You're throwing away your career over a misunderstanding?" Laura swallowed hard. "I'm saving it." The enforcer in crimson's veneer cracked wide open. "You think they'll protect you? The county eats whistleblowers alive. You'll lose everything." Laura's eyes glistened. "Maybe, but at least I'll sleep." For a second, silence filled the room. Thick, suffocating, final. Then I slid a flash drive across the desk. "It's over," I said. "Channel 8 airs it tonight. You might want to watch." The clipboard queen didn't move, just stared at the drive as if touching it might burn her. Laura turned toward me. "What now?" "Now," I said. "We make sure she can't rewrite what comes next." I looked around the office. The manicured chaos, the color-coded binders, the glass case of HOA awards. All of it built on intimidation, on fear disguised as decorum. "You built this cage," I told Cynthia, "but every bar was welded from other people's silence, and today, they stopped being quiet." As we left, her reflection trembled in the glass. The enforcer in crimson sat back down, shaking, staring at the empty door. Outside, the air smelled like rain again, but this time, it carried relief. Laura exhaled shakily beside me. "I recorded that whole thing," she whispered. "Her confession's on my body cam." I nodded. "You just became the reason this ends right." For the first time in weeks, the world didn't feel rigged in her favor. Justice wasn't coming later. It had already arrived, quiet, steady, and wearing a badge. By the time Channel 8's van rolled into the subdivision, the air had the electric stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. Neighbors gathered behind hedges, peeking through blinds. Cynthia Granger's fortress of order, the HOA office, stood polished and still, its windows reflecting gray sky. She had no idea the cameras were about to turn her kingdom inside out. I spent the morning with Laura Chen finalizing our chain of evidence, her body cam footage, my mirrored drive, Marcia's newsletters, all synchronized, time-stamped, and notarized through Dean's precinct contact. Every document now existed in 3 places: the cloud, the press, and the county's public records portal. The moment the broadcast aired, the board chair's version of reality would dissolve. Dean pulled up in his patrol SUV, unmarked but unmistakable. "You ready for the fallout?" he asked. I nodded. She built her entire empire on intimidation. Let's see how she handles exposure. Across the street, the enforcer in crimson emerged from her doorway, like she was walking into a boardroom, not a battlefield. Even now, she dressed for power. Scarlet blazer, pearl earrings, hair pinned tight as her temper. She noticed the news van, and her smile wavered. For once, she didn't control the narrative. I watched her call someone on her phone, pacing the driveway. Within minutes, 2 board members arrived, Greg Simons and Helen Boyd. Greg looked pale. Helen looked terrified. The clipboard queen barked orders, forcing them toward the office like troops to a trench. "Cameras," Dean muttered. "She's going to make a statement." "Good," I said. "She'll bury herself live." We followed at a distance. Inside, Cynthia arranged folders on the podium, rehearsing lines under her breath. The tyrant in heels was still clinging to structure, pretending control could drown consequence. When the reporter entered, mic raised, she smiled with plastic precision. "Ms. Granger," Tanya Rhodes said, "Channel 8 received multiple reports of misconduct and evidence tampering by the Willow Ridge HOA board. Would you like to respond before tonight's broadcast?" The officer of rules folded her arms. "Those reports are defamatory. Any material you've been given was illegally obtained." Tanya didn't blink. "So you deny altering community surveillance footage?" I deny any wrongdoing, Cynthia said crisply. This so-called footage is a fabrication, probably edited by disgruntled residents. That's when Laura stepped from behind the reporter, badge visible, calm, but resolute. It wasn't edited, she said, and it wasn't fabricated. You admitted to disabling cameras on record this morning. Gasps scattered through the room. The clipboard queen froze mid-breath. The camera light caught the sweat on her temple. You, she started, voice cracking. You recorded me? Laura nodded once. Body cam policy. Transparency works both ways. For a moment, the board chair's face collapsed into disbelief. Then, anger, cold and surgical. You'll regret this, she hissed. All of you will. I stepped forward. No, Cynthia. We'll remember this. There's a difference. Dean handed Tanya a flash drive. That's the verified copy. Broadcast rights cleared. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but deliberate. The enforcer in crimson looked toward the window, perhaps realizing the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Her reflection wavered, fractured by lightning. When Tanya and her crew left, the office emptied except for Cynthia and me. Papers littered the floor where she'd dropped them. She looked up slowly. You think this ends with a broadcast? I have friends in higher places than you can imagine. I met her eyes. Then maybe they'll enjoy watching you on prime time. Her shoulders sagged, the authority bleeding out of her posture. I just wanted order, she whispered. No, I said quietly. You wanted obedience. You called it order because fear sounded better in writing. I turned to leave. Behind me, she muttered something I couldn't quite catch, half plea, half curse. Outside, Laura waited by the patrol car. You think she'll run? She asked. No, I said. People like her don't run. They cling until the powers pried from their fingers. Dean started the engine, rain streaking across the windshield. 6 o'clock, Channel 8. The world meets the real Cynthia Granger. As we drove off, the HOA sign blurred through the storm. Its gold letters gleamed under the rain like a relic from a vanished kingdom. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive, nervous, whispering, waking up from fear. And in that storm, I realized something. Tyranny doesn't collapse with a bang. It erodes, word by word, truth by truth, until the silence that fed it is finally gone. By 6 that evening, the entire subdivision was lit by television screens. Curtains parted, porches glowed blue, and the hum of gossip filled the rain-heavy air. Cynthia Granger had ruled this community through whispers, but tonight, the whispers belonged to everyone else. Inside my living room, Dean leaned against the window while Laura watched the countdown on the news ticker. The footage we'd compiled, the one the enforcer in crimson tried to bury, was cued for primetime broadcast. My chest tightened with every second. Justice doesn't come quietly. It arrives trembling, unpredictable, like a storm trying to find its way through static. 5 seconds, Dean said softly. The screen cut to Tanya Rhodes, standing outside the HOA office. Good evening. What began as a neighborhood dispute has now raised serious questions about power, privacy, and abuse within Willow Ridge's Homeowners Association. Then came the footage. Cynthia's voice filled the room. Dress code violations invite discipline. The clipboard queen's words sounded colder on tape. Every lie she'd built her empire upon, every smirk, every command, played for the world to see. Her red jacket glowed under the park's lamplight as the video showed her grabbing my daughter's arm, then ordering the cameras disabled minutes later. Laura covered her mouth. It's worse hearing it out loud, she whispered. I said nothing. I just watched the tyrant in heels become her own undoing. Across the street, I saw shadows gathering on Cynthia's porch, neighbors knocking, demanding answers. The officer of rules had finally lost control of her narrative. The broadcast continued. Tanya's voice narrated, legal experts confirm these actions may constitute both physical assault and evidence tampering. County officials have announced an inquiry. Dean exhaled. That's it. It's out. But the satisfaction didn't feel clean. I looked at my daughter, curled asleep on the couch, unaware of the war being fought in her name, and thought of every night fear had replaced peace in our home. Exposure wasn't victory. It was the beginning of accountability. A sharp knock rattled the front door. Laura and I exchanged glances. Dean stepped forward, hand near his holster out of habit. When I opened it, rain spilled in, and there, stood Cynthia Granger. Her hair clung to her face, makeup streaked, crimson blazer soaked dark as wine. But her eyes, those hadn't changed, still calculating, still dangerous. "Congratulations," she said, voice low but steady. "You turned my life into a circus." "You did that yourself," I replied. The board chair took one trembling step forward. "Do you know what it's like to build something? To control chaos so people can feel safe, and then watch it burn?" "Control isn't safety," I said. "And you never built anything. You just kept people afraid long enough to believe you did." Her jaw tightened. "You've made enemies you don't even understand." Dean's voice was calm but firm. "Step off the property, Ms. Granger." For a second, I thought she'd lash out again, but instead, she let out a strange, hollow laugh, the kind people make when they realize their own mythology has collapsed. "You think this neighborhood will thank you?" she said. "They need people like me, someone to remind them what order costs." "Order without empathy isn't leadership," Laura said quietly from behind me. "It's tyranny." The tyrant in heels turned toward her, eyes blazing. "You?" she spat. "You think you're a hero because you recorded me? You're a footnote in someone else's headline." Laura didn't flinch. "At least I can live with mine." The rain intensified, streaking down the porch light between us. Cynthia's defiance flickered, replaced by something unfamiliar. Fear. "You ruined me," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "You revealed yourself." She stared at me for a long, hollow second, then stepped back into the rain. The enforcer in crimson walked down the street, her heels sinking into puddles, her reflection fractured by ripples. When she turned the corner, I closed the door. The storm outside had found its match inside her. Dean looked at me. "You think that's the last we'll see of her?" I shook my head. "Not yet. People like Cynthia don't vanish. They echo." And somewhere, through thunder and static, I could already feel the next one forming. The night after the broadcast, Willow Ridge felt eerily calm, like a battlefield after the dust settles, but before anyone dares to move. Streetlights flickered against wet pavement, and whispers replaced the usual HOA authority emails. Cynthia Granger had gone silent. For a woman who lived through power, silence was her most dangerous weapon. I sat on the porch with Dean and Laura, reviewing the aftermath. County investigators had confirmed an official suspension of the HOA board pending inquiry. The enforcer in crimson had vanished from sight since the previous night's confrontation, her SUV absent, her windows dark. But silence never meant surrender. It meant plotting. "She's not done," Dean said, scanning the quiet street. "Women like her don't take the fall. They dig deeper." "No," I replied. "And that's why we can't wait for the county to finish their paperwork." Laura looked uneasy. "You're planning something." "Not planning," I said. "Finishing." That morning, I discovered something buried deep in the HOA's public-facing site. A private emergency fund allocation folder, password protected, tied to Cynthia's account. But the real tell was the metadata. Its creation date matched the week she fined the Johnson family for non-compliance. Those funds were supposed to pay for neighborhood maintenance. Instead, they'd been rerouted, tens of thousands of dollars, to a shell account registered in her maiden name. The clipboard queen hadn't just abused authority. She'd been embezzling from the very people she ruled. By noon, Dean had confirmed it. "We traced the transfers," he said, sliding me the report. "She's been laundering HOA funds through a fake landscape contractor, paper trails airtight." The tyrant in heels had turned her neighborhood into a personal ATM. We agreed to confront her before she fled. The three of us drove to the clubhouse, ironically, the same place she'd held her infamous integrity assemblies. The building stood still under gray clouds, glass doors locked, blinds drawn. But I could see a faint light through the window. "She's inside," I said. Dean nodded. "Let's keep it calm." We entered through the maintenance door Laura had access to. Inside, the faint hum of a printer echoed. Cynthia sat behind the desk, shredding papers in a frenzy. Her crimson blazer hung over a chair, and her once polished hair now clung to her face. The officer of rules had been reduced to panic. She froze when she saw us. "You have no authority to be here," she snapped, voice trembling. "This is private property." "Paid for by every homeowner you defrauded," I replied. "We traced your fund transfers. County audit starts tomorrow." Her eyes darted toward the shredder. "You don't understand. These weren't thefts. They were reallocations. I kept this place alive while everyone else complained. Dean stepped forward, tone steady but cold. You used residents' money to pay for personal legal counsel, spa memberships, and jewelry purchases. That's not survival. It's theft. Cynthia's breath hitched, her composure cracking. I gave this community standards. You think it just runs itself? I looked around the spotless room, her trophies, plaques, framed HOA leadership awards. No, I said. You ran it like a dictatorship with better landscaping. She glared at me, voice rising. You don't get it. Without me, this place collapses. They need order. They need fear. Laura's voice came calm but sharp. No, Cynthia, they need fairness. And you wouldn't know fairness if it knocked on your door wearing a badge. Cynthia's facade shattered completely. You people are destroying everything I built. Dean held up his phone, showing her the live camera feed. No, you destroyed it yourself, and now everyone's watching you do it. Outside, the Channel 8 van idled at the curb again, live feed already rolling. For a moment, the clipboard queen just stood there, trembling. Then her eyes went to me, cold, wet glass over fire. You'll regret humiliating me, she said softly. I always find a way back. Then find it in court, I said, turning to leave. She lunged forward as if to grab the files, but Dean blocked her path. It's over, ma'am, he said firmly. You're under investigation. Don't make it worse. As we stepped outside, rain began again, gentle, cleansing, relentless. Behind us, Cynthia's scream echoed through the glass like a ghost clinging to its final throne. The enforcer in crimson had built her power on fear. Now, for the first time, she was the one afraid. The public confrontation wasn't supposed to happen that day. But with Cynthia Granger, timing was always her last line of control. By morning, flyers had appeared on mailboxes announcing an emergency HOA assembly. The notice bore her signature, elegant as always, even under pressure. She was summoning the neighborhood one final time, not to apologize, but to rewrite the ending. By 6 p.m., the community center overflowed. Neighbors packed every seat, faces tight with curiosity, anger, or fear. Even those who'd once worshipped the board chair now whispered about the missing funds, the deleted footage, the broadcasts that had gone viral overnight. The air itself buzzed with expectation. Dean stood near the back with Laura, both recording on separate devices. I waited by the aisle, giving Cynthia her stage. She entered moments later, dressed in deep red once more, the enforcer in crimson reclaiming her costume of command. Her smile was perfectly practiced, her posture unshaken. But her eyes, they betrayed her. Good evening, she began, voice amplified through the microphone. I know there's been confusion, misinformation spread by individuals with personal agendas. Boos rippled through the room. She waited, jaw tightening until they quieted. For years, I've dedicated myself to preserving the beauty, order, and safety of Willow Ridge. I've made hard decisions, unpopular ones, but always for the greater good. From the corner, Marcia Coleman rose. You call grabbing a child by her hair a hard decision? The clipboard queen's smile faltered. That incident has been grossly misrepresented. Laura stepped forward then, placing a small speaker on the podium. Let's hear it from you directly, she said. With a single tap, the recording played. Cynthia's voice from the HOA office. Dress code violations invite discipline. I decide what order means. The words struck like thunder. The audience gasped, phones raised. The tyrant in heels blinked hard, realizing she was cornered from every side. That's out of context, she stammered. Those recordings were illegally obtained, Dean's voice echoed from the back. All obtained under an active investigation, Ms. Granger, fully authorized. She turned toward him, her poise cracking. You think this is justice? You're letting a few ungrateful residents destroy a legacy. A legacy built on fear, I said, stepping into the center aisle. You built this place like a courtroom and made yourself the judge. The officer of rules slammed her palm against the podium. Because no one else had the courage to lead. The room erupted, neighbors shouting, some defending, most condemning. Years of silent resentment found their voice all at once. Every fine, every humiliation, every knock on their door at midnight, now unleashed in a chorus of rage. I walked closer. You mistook silence for respect. but people don't follow tyrants because they admire them. They follow because they're afraid. Until one person stops. She stared at me, shaking. "You think you've beaten me?" she whispered. "You don't understand what power is." "Power isn't control," I said. "It's restraint. It's knowing when to stop before you cross the line. You never learned that." Dean motioned toward the entrance. County investigators entered, 2 officials and a uniformed deputy. The crowd hushed instantly. "Ms. Granger," the lead investigator announced, "you're being taken in for questioning under charges of embezzlement, evidence tampering, and physical assault." The clipboard queen froze. The microphone squealed with feedback as her hand gripped it like a lifeline. "You can't! This is my community!" she shouted, voice breaking. As the officers approached, the enforcer in crimson's composure collapsed. Her blazer hung loose, her hair unpinned, her defiance trembling into disbelief. Neighbors whispered as she was escorted down the aisle, some satisfied, others stunned. She passed me without a word, but her glare said everything. The look of a ruler watching her kingdom turn its back. Outside, flashes from reporters' cameras lit the storm-dark sky. She was the story now, the fall of the HOA queen, the tyrant dethroned. Laura exhaled, whispering, "It's over." I shook my head. "Not yet. It ends when this place remembers what community really means." Behind us, the officers led Cynthia into the waiting cruiser. For the first time, she wasn't giving orders. She was following them. The rain started again, soft but endless, washing the stains from the pavement where her heels once ruled. The day after Cynthia Granger was taken away, Willow Ridge no longer looked like the same place. For the first time in years, the gates were open, the emails stopped, and neighbors actually talked without fear of surveillance. The air itself felt lighter, as if the community had exhaled. But peace doesn't come quietly. It comes after reckoning. I stood outside the HOA office that morning, now sealed with yellow tape. The enforcer in crimson's nameplate had been pried off the door. I picked it up from the ground and turned it over in my hands. The brass still gleamed, stubbornly polished, a symbol of power she thought would never fade. Dean joined me, arms folded. "County confirms she'll be charged," he said. "Embezzlement, obstruction, and endangerment. She's not walking out of this one." I nodded slowly. She built this place on fear. Now the same laws she twisted are catching up to her. Across the street, children played on the park lawn, the same lawn where she'd once scolded families for unauthorized gatherings. The clipboard queen signs were gone, her rules replaced by something simpler: decency. Marcia arrived with a stack of petitions. "We're voting tonight," she said. "New bylaws. No board can act without recorded votes in open meetings. Transparency clause goes at the top." Laura smiled faintly. "You've learned from the best." Marcia shook her head. "No, we've learned from the worst." The tyrant in heels had never understood that fear doesn't last. It just pauses people long enough to plan their rebellion. By evening, the community gathered at the clubhouse again, but this time, no microphones, no polished speeches, no crimson jackets. Just neighbors and candles, a quiet meeting of people reclaiming what belonged to them. I spoke last, not as a sheriff, but as a father. "Every rule needs purpose," I said, "and the moment it stops protecting people, it stops being law. It becomes control." Cynthia forgot that. "Let's make sure we never do." They voted unanimously to dissolve the old board. The officer of rules was officially erased from the records she once manipulated. Her legacy would now exist only in court transcripts and cautionary tales. Afterward, Laura walked up beside me. "It feels strange," she said, "like waking up from a long noise." I looked around. The laughter, the shared food, the absence of fear. "That's what silence sounds like when it's finally honest," I said. Later that night, I drove to the county jail. The officer on duty nodded me through. Cynthia sat in the visitor's room, still in a tailored suit, though without her usual poise. "You came to gloat?" she asked quietly. "No," I said. "I came because people like you always think they're misunderstood. I wanted you to know you weren't. We understood you perfectly." Her eyes flickered with something fragile. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "Just freer," she scoffed. "You'll see. Sooner or later, this place will need someone like me again." I leaned forward. If it ever does, it'll be because we stopped paying attention, and that won't happen again. For a long moment, the clipboard queen said nothing. Then she looked away, and I realized it wasn't defiance anymore. It was emptiness. The power she once wore like armor had evaporated, leaving nothing behind. When I stepped outside, the night air smelled like rain again. I looked up at the blinking streetlights, unsteady, imperfect, but still shining. The next morning, the first official act of the new board was posted on every door. Community repairs to begin this week. All volunteers welcome. People signed their names without fear. And as I walked home past the park, I thought of Lily, my daughter, running free across the grass she once wasn't allowed to touch. For the first time in a long while, Willow Ridge wasn't ruled. It was alive. If you've ever stood your ground against someone who thought they owned your peace, remember this. Order built on fear collapses the moment truth stops whispering and starts speaking. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.